People like to play Stump the Atheist in my comments and DMs all the time, sending me arguments for God that they're sure will melt my brain with their pure intellectual power or something like that. The other day, I got one of these comments asking me the question that atheists can't answer, apparently. If Christianity is a man-made religion, why does it go against all of man's desires? I thought, oh, that's a fun one, and it gives me an excuse to talk about cognitive science again on my channel, even though I've been doing that a lot lately. I thought maybe I would make a video about it. So I looked up the question to see if any actual theologians were talking about it, and I didn't find that, but oh my sweet Darwin, are there a lot of posts about this online, from Reddit to Quora to whatever cesspit I got this from, I don't even remember. Particularly, there are a lot of TikToks posing the question. Here's the most popular one I found, along with the source of the most popular sound on the subject.
People be like, Christianity is man-made. Okay, well then why does everything about it go against man's desires?
So, as someone who does think Christianity is man-made, I'll answer this question the best I can. A few people on TikTok have already made their own responses, so I'll shout out a couple of them as I give my answer. To start, let's break this question down. The implicit claims of this supposed dilemma for those who doubt Christianity's divine origin are as follows. Christianity only goes against man's desires, never satisfies, appeals to, or reinforces them. Man-made religions would never go against man's desires, but only appeal to them. Religions that go against man's desires most likely have divine origins, and Christianity goes against man's desires more than any other religion. I'll address these claims one by one, and by the end, you tell me if this is really a question that atheists can't answer. Honestly, though, you don't have to be an atheist to have a good answer to this question. I think Christians who are religiously literate and or knowledgeable about the cognitive science of religion could too. My answer will not be anti-Christian, only anti-ignorance. Okay, claim 1. Christianity only goes against man's desires. You know how Christian apologists like to say that if you leave Christianity and become an atheist, you'll have no basis for meaning and purpose in your life?
But atheists, all they're left with is to build their lives on, as the great British atheistic philosopher Bertrand Russell put it, the firm foundation of unyielding despair. That is the world that is consistent with atheism.
While I think this statement is untrue and is primarily a scare tactic to keep people in the faith, it does reflect the fact that many people find meaning, purpose, and emotional comfort in Christianity, and that they desire all of those things.
And let someone know today that they aren't an animal, not goo, that they actually have a purpose, and that purpose is found through Jesus Christ.
I highly doubt this is something any Christian willing to pose the original question would deny. The TikToker who made the most popular video on the original question has even posted things like this and pinned them on her profile. What am I supposed to get from this other than a relationship with the Christian God is something she desires and gets from Christianity? This makes it look like Christianity gives you something you want, and isn't that exactly what you're going for here? That's cool with me. I'm happy for you. It just really undermines your point in this other video. Christianity can also give people a sense of personal identity, which, again, is something that humans desire.
Your identity is found in the fact that you are loved by Jesus. That you no longer need to identify with anything externally, but you can identify with Him spiritually. And that is the greatest gift that you can experience today.
Maybe even more importantly, Christianity has provided billions of people with a sense of group identity for thousands of years now. This kind of identity can help people band together to create social safety nets and institutions of great political power. I mean, Christian identity is so powerful in the US that political candidates like Trump can win votes by telling Christians that the political left is trying to destroy Christianity and that he'll defend it if elected. With nearly 50 sources reporting on this, it's clear that Christian identity is a powerful force in today's world. I, of course, found this story on Ground News, a news aggregator app and website I use to stay informed. I actually do read the news almost entirely on Ground News, and I'm not just saying that because they're a longtime sponsor of this channel. Check them out at ground.news/skeptic. The link is in the description. Let's take a closer look at this story. Comparing coverage is interesting. This headline highlights Trump's statement that it's crazy for people of faith to vote for Democrats, implying that it's somehow obvious that the left is against religion. In contrast, this headline refers to perceived threats from the left, implying that the idea of Christian persecution by the left may only be a matter of perception, not fact. With just a single word or phrase, headlines can influence public perception to go in significantly different directions. Luckily, the tools Ground News provides make it easy to stay aware of bias in news coverage and get the full story. Go to ground.news/skeptic to try it out. Subscribe through my link for 40% off unlimited access to the Vantage subscription, which is what I use. Or you can try it out for less than $1 this month. Especially on polarizing topics like religion, Ground News helps us see all sides and get properly informed. Supporting them also supports my channel. Getting back to the video. The very salvation narrative of Christianity could be said to be a product of man's desires. Long before Jesus, the people of Judea found themselves under the rule of outside forces. The concept of a Messiah, a great champion of the Jewish people who would establish a new kingdom for the faithful, consequently developed. Eventually, Jesus started his ministry. Some followers thought he was the Messiah, but then those followers were shocked when Jesus was crucified. The narrative of what the Messiah was then started to change for those followers. Jesus was the Messiah who did establish a new kingdom, the narrative went, but his kingdom was a spiritual one, not a physical one. He did save us, even though he didn't defeat our oppressors on earth. A few decades later, the Jewish people revolted against the Romans and were defeated. Their temple was even destroyed. Out of despair, then, certain Jews would be motivated to believe that the Messiah had actually come, and that they could enter into his kingdom in heaven if they only accepted him. Simultaneously, miracle stories involving the apostles began to spread, and Gentiles started accepting the idea that the God of the Christ followers was much more powerful than their deities. Out of desire for greater favors from a deity, some Gentiles began a reciprocity with what we now think of as the Christian God. In short, the development of Christianity occurred in a context where people desired precisely what Christianity offered. As it continued to develop, powerful Christian leaders wrote many things they desired into scripture and church tradition. The Roman world of the time was extremely patriarchal, and the author of 1 Timothy, who is probably not Paul, asserted that a woman cannot have authority over a man, perpetuating his preferred gender norm, even though the Apostle Paul had already recognized women apostles. The Roman Empire later made Christianity its official religion and used Christianity as a tool to achieve their political desires. This continued even after Rome through the Roman Catholic Church. I think all of this is enough to say Christianity doesn't only go against man's desires. It was shaped by them, and at times satisfies, appeals to, and reinforces them. But what about all the things it forbids? Man-made religions wouldn't restrict all these things that man desires, right? Well, there are actually very good sociological reasons to perpetuate restrictive norms within a group. Research within the cognitive science of religion has found that social groups which require more costly sacrifices for membership tend to better endure the test of time. Members who give up certain desires out of loyalty to the group effectively signal to others that they can be trusted, since, after all, they are willing to pay a price to uphold the group's standards. This promotes pro-social behavior within the group, fostering cooperation and promoting its longevity. This is a very brief summary of what's called costly signaling theory, and it applies to all social groups with norms. So, all social groups, not just Christian ones. As the always excellent religion scholar Dr. Dan McClellan said in his response to this question,
"This is an evolutionarily installed feature of all human sociality."
He also put some sources on screen in his response, which I'll include here. Thank you for your great work, Dr. McClellan.
This experimentation will discuss this principle of pro-sociality and costly signaling and credibility-enhancing displays in more detail if you would like it.
With how ingrained costly signaling is in human minds, I don't think the specific restrictions within Christian ethics had to be created intentionally. More and less restrictive forms of Christianity, influenced by different cultural contexts, have existed throughout history. Some have restricted sex completely, while some others have encouraged polygamy. Some have gladly permitted alcohol, and some have banned it outright. The restrictions which have lasted are those which have allowed Christian groups to most effectively endure and spread. Basically, such restrictions are probably more of a product of cultural evolution than direct human design. So while these features do qualify as man-made, as a product of human minds, that's not to say they were all created intentionally by men as a piece of social engineering. Okay, but religions that go against man's desires more likely have divine origins, don't they? I think my previous discussion of cognitive science is enough to conclude, no, not at all, but let's look at this from another angle. Other religions also place restrictions on man's desires. Islam demands very regular prayer times, forbids alcohol, certain meats, certain types of debt, demands anyone who is able to make a pilgrimage, etc. So, Christians, what does this imply? As the TikToker Devoutly Agnostic said,
but let's follow the logic for a second. Are you saying that if a prescription goes against man's desire, that prescription is automatically divine? Like the Quran says that you shouldn't eat pork. So that means like no bacon. That goes against the desire of a lot of men that I know. Therefore, the Quran is from God. If I tell someone to burn their house down, that clearly goes against man's desires. So does that make that commandment God speaking through me? No, of course not. This argument for the validity of the Bible from a logical perspective it's silly.
Right. If we ignore the sociological reasons for restrictions on man's desires within groups and instead follow this argument to its logical end, we must conclude that Christianity isn't the only divinely created religion. Instead, basically, all religions are divine in origin. Given that many religions contradict the truth claims of many others, the conclusion that all religions are divine is unlikely, if not totally absurd. Okay, but Christianity goes against man's desires more than any other religion, right? Christianity has long had restrictions on sexuality and gender roles, but compared to many other groups, most forms of Christianity are rather relaxed. Like I mentioned, popular forms of Islam typically have more restrictions on one's time, money, and diet, but this is far from the best example of a religion which goes against man's desires. Let me read you the Four Noble Truths, the central ideas of Buddhist philosophy. 1. Life is suffering. 2. Attachment to desire causes suffering. 3. Suffering ends with the attachment to desire. And 4. The Eightfold Path is the path to liberation from suffering. So, Buddhism doesn't just place restrictions on man's desires, it seeks to eliminate desire itself. Jainism is also built upon this idea, but typically takes restrictions on one's actions and desires even further than Buddhism. In order to uphold a strict code of nonviolence against all life, including microorganisms, Jains are forbidden from consuming meat, eggs, root vegetables, fungi, yeast, honey, any fermented foods, which includes alcohol, foods stored overnight, unfiltered water, and more. Jains must always be cognizant of ways they could even accidentally harm minute beings. So some even sweep the ground in front of them as they walk in order to avoid stepping on any living thing. Talk about going against man's desires. Really, all of the major world religions and many philosophical traditions have had ascetic practices within them at some point. So the spiritual aim of eliminating attachment and desire has hardly been rare throughout history. This does not, of course, indicate that all of these traditions have divine origins. However, it does indicate that the popular Christianity of TikTokers like these is very, very far from restrictive on man's desires, relatively speaking. So, to recap, Christianity does not just go against man's desires, but also fulfills them. All social groups place restrictions on man's desires as a way to create in-group trust and cooperation. A group's restrictions on man's desires do not indicate the divine origins of that group, and certain non-Christian religions go against man's desires far more than Christianity. Apologetics like these are frustrating, not just because they imply outright falsehoods, but also because their proponents spread them with a smugness that can only be achieved through a profound ignorance of the subject on which they're speaking. People, when you hear an argument for your view, please make sure you read about that subject for a while before you parrot that argument online. Like I said, one could be a Christian and answer this question just as I did, which is one reason it's so sad to see TikTok Christianity thriving on religious, scientific, and cultural illiteracy. If nothing else, at least becoming more well-informed might increase your chances of finally asking a question that atheists like me really can't answer. Thank you for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. A special thanks to my patrons for their constant love and support. If you want to hear more from me, then subscribe. As always, if you are an apostate in need, there are resources linked in the description to help you find community and mental health support. Remember to be kind to others in the comments, and until next time, stay skeptical.